Hey, how you doing? My name's Jeff, and I was an alcoholic. And good morning. I want to share a piece, take this time to share a piece of my incredible journey through alcoholism and addiction and how Jesus set me free. God is good. I struggled for the last few years trying to figure out a way to get this out to people around me, especially on here with people that struggle, not just with alcoholism or addiction, just life in general, struggles of life in general. I got so much to say on this matter and what God has done in my life in the last 3 years, but it would take pretty much every day for the rest of my life. It's so overwhelming at every level, from every different angle of life and spirituality, that it's just really it's overwhelming in a good way. So I'm going to try to summarize and paint a picture of kind of what it's been like the last few years. A lot of drinking early in, partying early in life, like a lot of people, high school, college, all that stuff, got the best of me. I was not any different than a lot of people, other than it got out of hand. So prior to becoming a believer in 1984, I was arrested, I believe 4 times, let go twice, charged twice with 2 DUIs. The last one resulted in a 5-year suspension of my license. During that lag time from that last arrest until I had to appear in court, it was about a year, and my good friend had shared the gospel with me, and I was obviously at a point where I was more receptive. I had always believed in God. I always believed in Jesus. I did not go to church. I was a C&E Christian, what they would say, Christmas and Easter, and I was a believer, but I was not a born again. I did not have a relationship with God in any way other than a generic belief. So while I was going through that lag time in my arrest, he shared the gospel with me. I gave my life to the Lord, became born again the first Thursday in October of '84. I was in church the next Sunday and got baptized in the name of Jesus. And from that point, I spent 18 years in sobriety. I was already in treatment. So when I had become a believer, when I started to, explore going all in with the Lord, I was already in the process of getting rid of drinking out of my life because I was on a suspended license, etc. So that being said, had 18 years of sobriety. Then I contemplated maybe becoming a social drinker, and do not ever do that. I started touring with the idea of that, and I saw and I felt that I was in a place after 18 years where I could somehow manage that, especially as a mature believer. I saw other mature believers balance this in their lives, and I managed to contemplate it, and I thought, well, I could do that too. Not good. So after 18 years later, I somehow found a way to justify that one drink as a professing alcoholic, as someone who had been arrested, as somebody who had come to church, had come to know God. I still somehow justified it with the insight, and I did it. And the rest, they say, is history. And baby steps. There's a thing called baby steps. And sometimes you can improve with baby steps. That's how it was in the movie. It's the baby step thing. You can also fail in baby steps. You can baby step to the point of death. And I want you to think about boiling a frog in water. They don't know what's going on. It's their normal everyday life. And it becomes too late. So you take that one moment of me justifying that drink and baby step that downward toward death instead of somebody using it to improve their lives. And that's what happened to me. Over the next 20 years, it became a once-in-a-while thing. A glass of wine at dinner somehow morphed into bringing wine and liquor into my home and justifying drinking and socializing and stuff like that. And it soon became normal. It was an epic snowball fail, if I could be honest. If you fast forward to COVID then, in 2020, when COVID hit, I was already way gone. I'd been drinking excessively for a long time. It had obviously an alcoholism in people and addicts. It doesn't stop. It always gets worse. It never gets better. So I was doing all that stuff, and I was looking for windows to drink, still going to church on Sundays because I love the Lord. And I was serving my role in church as the house hypocrite. I always loved Jesus, and when I asked him into my life, it changed me. I still had to deal with my everyday life, though. In March of 2020, I was working at GM. COVID was raging, and then 2 people at GM died. And that was pretty much it from Mary Barra's perspective. She's the CEO. And she sent everybody home immediately. They called us into a conference room, told us to go home, collect our monitors, our computers, and we'll meet next week to kind of hash this stuff out. At that point, I was already a mess. My body had become accustomed to alcohol, and it became an actual need for my body. 6 months earlier, prior to COVID, I knew that I was reaching a tipping point because I started to manifest shaking and withdrawal symptoms. It was relatively mild. When they sent us home at COVID, I stocked up. I stopped at the store, got a few bottles, and my file cabinet became my liquor cabinet. From that point on, everything got worse at every level and started to accelerate madly. By August of 22, I'd spent 3 days in detox on 2 separate occasions. The first was due to an intervention of a good friend that could basically see what was going on and force me to go. It was just a Band-Aid. Detox is great, but you're locked in a room with tubes. You get sedated, which is cool for an alcoholic to get sedated. Then after 3 days, you stop shaking, so they give you a list of AA meetings and they send you home. I did that twice, which means I got out and drank and went to church and sang. Bondage is awful, and it's not a respecter of persons or status. If you're in doubt of that you're somehow immune to things like this, and maybe you are, but you can just watch the news. Current events of this last week weigh that out. Anyway, two detoxes didn't help. Things got worse. Next stop was an institution. In December of 21, I was admitted to a rehab program for 3 weeks. I spent Christmas of 2021 in an asylum. It's not really an asylum. It was a rehab for addicts, but it was still an asylum. I was isolated for the first 3 days because I was in acute withdrawal. I couldn't stand under my own power or walk because of severe tremors. I was sharing a room with heroin addicts, meth addicts, just a bunch of lowlifes, to be honest with you. But I was one of them. Anyway, they released me just before New Year's. I think if not on New Year's Eve, they may have released me. So my son picked me up and drove me home. The Christmas tree had a few gifts on it with my name because I miss Christmas. Somehow after all that, Marie was working and my son left after he dropped me off at home, so I went out to buy some gifts. Somehow after all that, the overwhelming compulsion to drink was too great, and I came home to wrap gifts with a fifth of vodka. The next thing I know, it's 6:30, and I hear the door open and then screaming, and wake up to see Marie over me screaming, "What have you done? What are you thinking?" I looked over at her and saw my half-empty bottle of vodka in her hands 6 hours after I was let out of the hospital. The kind of heartbreak and disappointment that I brought to people I love breaks me to this day, despite God's restoration of my life. But nothing changed. Nothing could. I was just so weak at this point. So between Christmas of 2021 and August of 22, I went back to detox another time with no luck. At this point, I'm snowballing downhill very fast. In July 22, we went to Florida for my niece's wedding. That was a disaster because at that time I needed alcohol more than water. I was in a constant state of need. If I didn't have alcohol, it would manifest in tremors. I was able to keep things at bay, but it was a disaster. We barely made it home, and Marie had me admitted 2 days later for another 3 weeks. I was out of work looking for a job and landed one starting in August that committed to prior to going to Florida. I spent 3 weeks in rehab, and then a week later got in my car to take that job and drive 4 days to Seattle. That was not good. Marie was terrified. I knew what laid ahead, but I had to make money. So I barely made it to Seattle, and for the next 6 weeks, it was pure hell at every level. I was remote and stuck in my son's house in a room. On September 14th, 2022, I was pretty much passed out 24/7, barely functioning. I had not bathed for weeks, and it was a trip to the hospital for me to try to take a shower, to stand up in a shower. And they don't let you drink in the hospital either, so there's no showers for me. On that day, I was put into an ambulance and taken to Providence Hospital in Seattle, where I spent the next 3 weeks. I was in bed, wired up for the first 2. The next week, I learned how to walk again via physical therapy and released into my son's care. I spoke with a neurosurgeon there. I had an MRI done amongst all kinds of other tests that they did when they took me in. And I had doctors coming in all the time, so I really didn't know who was who. And this guy comes in and says, "Hi, I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm so-and-so." And I asked, "Well, what are you doing here?" "I'm an addict." He said, "Your MRI is troubling." Basically, yada, 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 and diagnosed me with Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is essentially wet brain. This kind neurosurgeon told me in so many words in front of my son, and had communicated to my wife and my sister, who was a nurse at Tampa General, that I would not likely ever do engineering again or deal with complex type of equations and that type of thing. He asked me how long I'd been drinking, and I told him. I'd been drinking almost 2 5 a day for months, and I slept with a bottle. The last 2 years at that point, I had calculated that I had drank 3 55-gallon drums of vodka. He paused and looked at me and told me that I was lucky to be alive. Today, let alone when I was admitted, he told me basically that my blood was dead, free of essentials, and told me that I had maybe a week or two left. So anyway, I was released after 3 weeks later, and it was the same. My son picked me up. We went home the next day and started fresh. I had 3 weeks sober. I was going to meetings and decided to move into a rental home that a guy at church had, and it was a fresh start. I was talking to Marie. She was feeling like maybe we were in the clear. The guy told me that he had a queen-size bed, so prior to going out there, moving in, I bought queen-size sheets and linens, and the day I move in, I find out it's a king. So I go back to Walmart. I had 3 weeks sober. I went to Walmart to buy sheets and somehow walked out with 2 5 of vodka. And that was it. That was the first week of November of 22, and within a week I was gone. I was incommunicado. Marie didn't have my address. Nobody really knew where I was. My son had to eventually find out where I was living. I missed Thanksgiving with my 2 sons that were out there that loaded me into an ambulance just a few weeks earlier. The bubble had popped. I lost it, and I knew this was how I'm now going to die. I had no desire or will to live or even try at this point. In the midst of it all, I was continually in touch with God, though. My heart was always the same, but it was my body and my will that was broken. I made the decision to at least have the dignity to come home to die and not lay any long-distance stuff on Marie to handle if I were to die in Seattle. It would have been too much. Do you see how much I care? How ironic. I would care about me dying out in Seattle and having her to come out there, and I didn't care about getting to that point. This is the insanity of alcoholism. My 2 sons came to pick me up on December 17th, helped me down the stairs and into the car. They drove me to SeaTac and loaded me into a wheelchair out front, and the gentleman took me down to the terminal. In all this, I was already contemplating and terrified at what was going to be coming down the pipeline. I needed to drink. I would start trembling every 3 hours or so and go into convulsions. I knew what getting through the night would look like. No alcohol. I was literally at God's mercy. The clock was working against me. My son picked me up on December 17th in Detroit, and we drove home. And I'd never been lower in my entire life. I never envisioned I would become this person. I never thought I would bring so much pain and heartbreak to another person, let alone the people that I loved, my wife. I got home around midnight, and I struggled to get in the house and into bed. I kissed Marie and told her I loved her, and I'm so sorry. I remember rolling over and thinking, what have I become? I was okay to die at this point. I had very intimate conversations with God about my condition physically, but also the condition of my heart. I knew He loved me, but more importantly, I knew that He knew that I loved Him. And I was deeply grieved and remorseful of how I had stewarded the life that He had given me. But I knew He loved me even where I was at. But I had nothing to offer Him or anybody anymore because of what I had become. I told Him many times, and more times that night than I really had nothing left. And I'd be okay, if He could just take me. We're all going to die. And I just said, I don't have anything left. It would be beneficial to Marie, to my sons, to my extended family, friends, to be free of me. I lost all hope, desire to live. I knew if I made it through the night what my future would look like too. I'd be in and out of treatment centers. I'd be drinking, letting my family and my friends down, and that, not that, anyway. I knew what my life would look like if I made it to the morning. And I had a history of me trying, and I know what it looks like, and I had resigned that I'm done. So weeping endures for the night, and joy comes in the morning. So I went to sleep. I slept soundly through the night, and around 7 the next morning, I opened my eyes. I just woke up. It wasn't like you roll around working on waking up. I just awoke. I opened my eyes and started to get up, waiting for the obvious to come, and it never came. I was perplexed and had slept through the night without waking up shaking or vomiting. I took inventory of the time and started to process my alcohol need and intake and timing, and realized it had been more than 12 hours since I have had a drink. I began to become aware of my body and the calmness that I had. I held out my hand and was still. I balanced a pencil on my finger, and I moved my arm around and looked at it like this, and that thing was as solid as if it was laid flat on a table. As the day progressed, I became aware of the clock and how much time was passing without my need or desire for alcohol. I was becoming very aware of what was going on. As a believer, I understand the spiritual dimension that was involved and has been a part of my life almost forever, so I was aware that there was something going on. Anyway, I looked like a homeless person. I hadn't shaved or had a bath in weeks. I was in a wheelchair, unable to walk 24 hours earlier, and I kept playing with that pencil. It fascinated me. Being able to balance that little stick on my finger has been a constant reminder of what God has done in my life.